Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms and the associated websites. So there's lots of activities, information, resources, and so on for people who work across the globe in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on, the associated businesses. So have a look at MedCommsNetworking.com. Specifically, you'll find we do a lot of video content, which is all collected together over at NetworkPharma TV. And webinars like this are all recorded and put there along with other video content. So that's there's 500 odd videos there now, so there's a big resource there to go and have a look at. And specifically, just a shout out to those of you who are interested in joining MedComms, maybe as a medical writer and account manager and so on. We produce a lot of information specifically that's trying to guide you into your career. If you look at firstmedcommsjob.com. And there's lots more, so go and have a look. Today, absolutely delighted that we've got the guys from AMICULUM. We're talking about Omnichannel and content creation, and I'm not going to steal their thunder. Basically, we've got a presentation, some Q&A. So those of you in the audience today, please do join in, questions, comments, and observations. But I'm going to hand over to Frank to kick us off. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thanks, Peter, and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along to the webinar today. And I think we should be getting some slides. Brilliant. Thanks, Melissa. So what we want to talk about today is omnichannel and content creation. As you can see, challenges for medical writing and content planning. Now, omnichannel is often looked at as a technical subject. In the pharmaceutical industry, it is much, much more than technical. It involves a change in the ways of thinking, some changes to the way that content is created and that medical writing projects are done, are organized and planned. But it is not just technical, it's not just digital. That's one of the things we want to get over here. That involves a mindset, and that it should encompass as well, not only digital channels of communication, but face-to-face as well. So I'll just introduce our panelists before anything else. Mel, thanks very much. We encourage you to scan these QR codes and come and LinkedIn stalk us if you want to. We will have plenty of experience with that, and we also got quite a lot of experience in the pharmaceutical realm, and particularly digital and omnichannel. So for myself, I've been doing this for, in fact, it's 16 years now. So digital comms for pharma on both the marketing and the medical side. Of late, very much medical and very much omnichannel. So a lot of work involved with Viva and omnichannel strategy and omnichannel implementation. Melissa has a background in social media and digital healthcare communication. She's our specialist when it comes to social media. Been working with us recently on these omnichannel campaigns, both planning, delivery, implementation as well. Very good at working with clients to tease out their objectives and think of both traditional and non-traditional ways of achieving those. And as I say, she provides input across AMICULUM as well, across the group on social media, so optimizing social media campaigns, social media listening, and such like. Malvika is a medical writer, senior medical writer, has worked with us on a lot of these omnichannel campaigns, so is in a great position to tell us how a traditional medical writer, someone with that scientific and medical expertise, can bring that to bear within omnichannel. So both in planning these omnichannel campaigns, the strategy involved behind it, but also the implementation, and of course that crucial element, the content creation and the content targeting. And she'll be able to talk about more of that later on. So please feel free to scan these QR codes and connect with us on LinkedIn. Next slide, please, Mel. So just quickly, what we're doing today, we're going to go through. We know that omnichannel will be new to some people here, so we're going to go through the basics, but that'll only take a few minutes. We'll look at some of the contrasts with multi-channel, and also what some of the challenges are for our clients, both medical and commercial. Malvika is going to look at the content creation aspects, as I said, focusing on the writing and the typical tasks there. And then Mel and myself will come back to the practical implementation of this within an omnichannel delivery. And we'll look at the channels involved, how we choose channels, and also some illustrative user journeys that HCPs might be expected to take within that strategy. And then obviously, as Peter mentioned, we have the Q&A after that. Next slide, please, Mel. And again. Brilliant. Thank you. So what do we mean by omnichannel? Now, I'll say, first of all, this is us here at AMICULUM. There are plenty of definitions of omnichannel out there, but this is what we mean, and it is generally the definition that most of our clients will follow as well. So what we're talking about here is something that is frictionless, personalized, and integrated. You will note from this graphic, we have the HCP at the center. That's the thing that differentiates this from multi-channel communications. So you could have an email campaign, you can have a website, you can have a Viva face-to-face deliverable, you can have WhatsApp campaigns, you can have, of course, personal face-to-face conversations at congresses elsewhere. But if you're not writing back all the information to this, if it is not coordinated to a central database that has the HCP at the middle, it is not omnichannel, it's multi-channel. You cannot have omnichannel without the HCP at the center. And what we're trying to do here is not just deliver all these materials to HCPs, but deliver them in this frictionless, personalized, and integrated way. So I'll go through that in some detail now. The audience here, and it's not always HCPs, even in the pharmaceutical industry, it isn't always HCPs. It might be patients, public, and others, but it's very often HCPs. They are targeted for communications through different channels, so both online and offline in a coordinated and targeted way. There is a frictionless transition between these different channels. They get an email, they click on a link, they go to a webinar. After the webinar, there is a survey. They don't have to fill in any forms. It is easy. It is frictionless. That's what we mean by that. There's a coherent narrative across all of these different communications. So the pharmaceutical company is telling one story, but they're telling it in a way that is individualized and personalized to that HCP. So it'll be an element of personalization, dear Dr. Smith, but also a segmentation based on perhaps their medical speciality, their position in an adoption ladder or an educational ladder regarding what they know about the particular company's products, treatment options, treatment regimens, and such like. So these materials are very personalized. And because we got this database at the back end, because we have this CRM at the center, and don't worry, I'll define CRM in a moment, these are integrated. All of these communication channels give a single and comprehensive view of the audience, so all the data gathered through these interactions. You'll have come across the phrase 360 view, as you see everything that the HCP does. You know everything that they do in relation to your company, and your representatives, be they commercial reps or MSLs, CAMs, whoever it might be. So you develop this picture of the HCP and the best way to communicate with them based on that. The future of omnichannel is clearly something that's going to be enabled and tweaked by AIs. We see that already. There is an element of automated communication in most mature omnichannel strategies for the clients that we work with at present. So features like next best action, next best scientific action, these are often triggered by algorithms that monitor other communications and interactions. AI is coming into that as well to look at patterns of behavior from groups of HCPs. So if a group of one specialism, all these oncologists, they really like this particular bit of data. Here's a new oncologist, he might like that bit of data too. So you will have systems like Salesforce Marketing Cloud that will push communications to the individuals based on things like that. So we see the future as being automation, data-driven algorithms, AI enablement. We can talk more about that to come in a moment as well. Next slide, please, Mel. So yeah, is it hard? Omnichannel, to someone who's brand new to it, you think this is a huge technical challenge. It's a nightmare to get into. It really isn't. The essentials are quite straightforward. And we're in a situation now in 2023 where, from a technology point of view, you can buy all of this off the shelf. You don't need to be developing technical infrastructure from scratch. Even if you're adopting a piecemeal approach rather than taking a suite of products from, say, Viva or IQVIA or Adobe Experience Manager, even if you're buying these things piecemeal and integrating them together, there is a technical sophistication now that means that there's an API, an application programming interface that will let them all join up. People on this call who are sent crazy by hearing acronyms like that, you don't need to worry about it, because For our clients, their IT departments, they're all over this. Their digital departments, they're all over this. There are not that many technical challenges, but there is a schedule that you have to stick to, or I should say a sequence that you have to stick to. First and foremost, you have to get the CRM first. That has to be there first. That's the customer relationship management database. That is basically a lookup database that has all your target audience in there. As I say, that's mostly HCPs. So those doctors, nurses, pharmacists, whatever they might be, they're in your CRM database. That has to come first. Without the CRM, there is no omnichannel. It's just multi-channel. And some of our clients struggle with that, not with setting it up, because their IT people will do that, but they sometimes struggle with the sequence. They're focused on the content and the end message, and they don't want to bother themselves with this stuff behind the scenes, the invisible things you can't see. It's infrastructure, and it often gets forgotten, but it has to be there first, and it will make your life so much easier if it's there first. A particular challenge that some of our medical colleagues have is that there will be a CRM that's been established by marketing, and perhaps some of the consents and the structures within it are not easily applicable to medical. And that is a challenge that we see, and obviously that is something that can be overcome quite easily. For any clients who are listening, one of the things to think about is when you're looking for communications consent from your HCPs, make sure it's a broad consent that covers medical communications as well as commercial and marketing communications. So just a little tip there. Another thing that some of our medical clients in particular have issues with is this area of segmentation and personas. So developing segmentations of HCPs, groups of HCPs, that they can target with communications based on this grouping. In marketing, they've been doing this for years. In medical, it's slightly new. You'll come across adoption ladders as probably the default way of doing this. So awareness of a particular drug, advocacy of that drug at one end, awareness at the other. Malvika will talk about more of this in a moment, but that seems to be an area where medical in particular, because it needs a little bit of imagination, where maybe it's more of a challenge for them than other aspects here. MSLs, again, for medical, winning over your field force. It's any field force. The reps, of course, normally buy into omnichannel because they see how effective this is in terms of communications. Any company that is not using omnichannel right now is going to fall behind in market share. But in terms of medical, where the immediate wins are perhaps harder to see, establishing return on investment is harder. Winning over MSLs can be a particular challenge, and they really need to understand what's in it for them, what's in it for their HCPs, and what's in it indirectly further down the line for patients, because you do need an enthusiastic buy-in from MSLs to make this work. Planning for long-term success. There is a focus on short, mid, and medium term. We need to get this omnichannel strategy up and running, but what happens when you've got it up and running? What happens when it works? How do you maintain this, keep it fresh, keep content fresh, make sure that HCPs remain engaged? So that can be a challenge as well. Planning for success and achieving success and then building on that can be an area that people forget, but we can obviously help in that area too. And content, the main focus of this presentation. Because this content needs to be segmented and personalized in order to be most effective, surely this is a huge burden. How can you create this? And where are all the specialized medical writers who can create omnichannel content? Well, quite a few of them are watching this today, I think. So are there any quick wins? Where do we begin? That's something that Malvika is going to take on now. So I will hand over to her.
Thank you, Frank. So in my part, I'm going to briefly walk over the omnichannel content planning from a writing perspective. And I think as Frank was alluding to just now, OC is something of a new concept for us in agencies and for a lot of our clients in pharma as well, maybe especially so on the medical side. There's also a lot of cross-functional collaboration needed. So medical may need to partner up with publications, with regulatory, with IT as well, just to get things running. There is a learning curve for pretty much everyone involved in omnichannel for the first time. I can say for me personally, as a writer, some of the things that I learned were that you need to start thinking from a more strategic and big picture point of view. So rather than looking at each different deliverable, like writing a manuscript or developing some slides, looking at them as pieces of a larger strategy and thinking about how all of these can come together. Also looking at the whole end-to-end process and the overall customer journey, which is something that Frank will talk about later. With Omnichannel, what we really want to do is try to reach the right audience through the right channel and give them the right message. So as I walk through the steps in the next few slides, I think one of the key takeaways that I would like to share with other writers is that we already have a lot of the skills that are needed. Yes, some things are new, the terminology is a little bit new, and I think particularly formats and channels is something that is unfamiliar, but there are many transferable skills. So we don't just break the process into smaller pieces and it will become more manageable. You can also start with small OC projects to get familiar with the terms and the processes. So looking at the overall planning and development process, these are the main steps that are involved. The first one is kind of a key step, which is to figure out the overarching story and the why we are doing this OC. What do we want people to know at the end? Usually this is also aligned to a global medical strategy. So one example could be we want to increase disease awareness in a certain therapy area. The next thing to do is to define and understand audiences, map out the communication goals and the key messages, select formats and channels, and then to go in and audit and develop content where it's needed. So I'm going to talk about each of these steps in a little bit more detail. Next slide. So the very first thing we want to look at is who is the target audience. These could be HCPs, they could be patients. If we are talking to HCPs, are they specialized in certain areas or are they general practitioners? These kind of things affect the tone and the overall content strategy, because if you have an audience that's not very aware of a disease area as yet, then you may need to spend some time in defining key concepts first. You can also lean on local insights like local market research to find out what your audience knows and what they don't know, and also understand what their communication preferences are. So this can be in terms of the platforms that they use. It can also be in terms of the content types itself. For example, are they engaging more with long form webinars or videos, or do they prefer short 5-minute readable things? Market insights can also tell you about the treatment landscapes and the challenges that people face within each market, and this can help you to develop a more tailored content strategy. Next slide. The next thing to consider is the messages that we want to get across. And this is where some of the concepts that Frank was mentioning about segmentation and adoption ladder come in. So segmentation is breaking down the overall target audience into smaller groups, and you can define the characteristics and the communication objectives that you want to get across to each segment within that audience. So if we're looking at increasing disease awareness, you can have, let's say, 3 segments of people who are novices in this area to aware to experts in the area. And the things that you would communicate to each group obviously depends on where they place within those segments. Adoption ladder is basically a concept that says that you want to, through the course of the omnichannel journey, you want to move people up each segment. So you'd want someone who starts off omnichannel as a novice to, by the end of the journey, have moved towards becoming more aware. Of course, this is the ideal situation. In reality, people engage with the content at different levels, and they may come in and come out of the journey at different points. But overall, this gives a goal or direction to work towards. So once segmentation is done, you can then review key messages for the omnichannel strategy and assign them to each segment. So for a novice, you would want to start with basic disease awareness information, but for an expert, you may want to go straight into more advanced topics. I visualize this as something like a scientific messaging platform, where you have all the key messages, key statements for a disease area and the references already there. And then you can think about which message is relevant for each segment within your audience and kind of assign the message to the segment. This way you keep the messaging consistent throughout the omnichannel journey. Next slide, please. So the next thing to consider are the type of channels that you will use in OC. So here's where we go ahead and review the existing channels that are being used within the company, and find the ones that would be the most impactful or useful for omnichannel. This can get a little bit tricky when you have different channels that would appeal to different segments. But the suggestion that we have is to start with what you can execute well. So if that's 2 channels or 3 or even 5, there's no fixed number here, but go with what you're confident can be done well, and there's already a level of familiarity and capability with that channel. Do also consider the pros and cons of each channel in the decision making, because this can affect the content that you develop for it. An example is some channels may have some interactive features, like you could put in polls or quizzes. So then you'd need to create content for that ahead of time. Again, there can be local nuances in the channel choice. So one example that comes to mind is WeChat is a huge channel in China, something that should definitely be considered, but it may not have as large of a reach outside China. So it's good to consider local insights as well. And ultimately, the channel should serve the overall communication goal. Next slide. The last thing is then to audit the available content that you have. So look at all of the materials already existing that you have access to, and just do an audit of them. This can be a very simple table on a Word document or on an Excel sheet, where you just list out everything that you have, what it contains, and the key messages that it addresses. For example, you might have 2 webinars on symptoms and diagnosis, and let's say a slide deck on clinical trial data. This is also the time to check back to that original list of key messages that was for each segment and just see that everything is covered. If there are key messages that aren't covered by the existing content, then that's a gap that needs to be filled. Once you have all this existing content mapped out, then you can start thinking about how it can be recycled and repurposed to make it fit for the channel and for the audience that you want to communicate it to. So if you have a video, you could make smaller bite-sized animated videos from it, or you could make slide decks into a series of infographics. The sky is really the limit here in terms of creativity. But yeah, the idea is just to make it fit for the different channels that you'd want to use. There may be some local needs to consider here as well. So you may need to do translations from English to local languages. Conversely, there can be something that's already in one language that can simply be subtitled or dubbed into a different language. You could also consider adding in any relevant local data, like data on epidemiology, prevalence, subgroup data, or local expert opinion data as well. Approval timings is also something to bear in mind. So it can be internal approvals, for example, regulatory or medical review of materials, or it could even be tech considerations in setting up a new channel. And these things can take some time, and because of the collaboration needed with different people, I think it's best to buffer in extra time so that it doesn't hold back deploying the the overall OC campaign. Next slide, Mel. So putting all of these pieces together, it can feel like a giant jigsaw puzzle or like a game board or something. I think the most important thing is to always keep the target audience in mind and think about whether the content is going to resonate with them and give them the information that they need. One last point to add as well is that it might be useful to consider the sequence and timing of releasing content. So there may be some milestones, for example, launch of a new indication or new trial data or congresses coming out, and you can factor those into Omnichannel and build awareness and interest in those before they happen. You can also repurpose material after the event has already happened. So you can take new data released from a congress or slides or something and plug that into the Omnichannel at a later point. All of this, of course, requires some planning and collaboration, thinking ahead. Overall, developing this content strategy can take some time, and it takes a few iterations of going through these steps. And also continuous refinement over time. So that's it from me, and I'll hand the time over to Mel now.
Thanks, Malvika. So taking into practice what Malvika just mentioned, we at MedComms like to put all of this into a content matrix to keep track of assets and their intended roles. The content matrix is a combination of an instructional sheet and checklist. When you start building out this content matrix, you'll find that it could be quite a bulky document. So we would suggest including color coding to help teams across the board from both agency and client side to understand and identify which ones are a priority. It also helps to identify which one needs to be adapted for local if it's been developed for global. Omnichannel is a strategy for a seamless customer experience across all channels, and different channels have different purposes. These channels can be bucketed into 3 depending on the type of conversation: triggers, engagement, and deep dive. Triggers are audience-driven actions that start a conversation, so the initial touch point when starting a customer journey. These could be social media updates, event registration platforms, booth visits, and SEM. Then once you start that conversation, you will need to nurture these customers down further into the adoption ladder. These are engagement channels which bring the messages to the top of the mind of audiences. These include third-party banners, MSL-triggered emails, and direct mails. Finally, you have deep dive channels. These are mainly for detailed conversation to explain more about the topic area and explain a bit more about why it matters. And some examples of these include webinars, websites, symposia, conferences, congresses, podcasts, and videos. Now that we've understood a bit more about the different channels and their purposes, we can look a bit further into selecting an appropriate channel mix. An effective omnichannel strategy requires a mix of channels to reach and engage customers across multiple different touchpoints. At AMICULUM, it allowed our clients to be in a better position to choose the channels that are more impactful for their target audience. A critical aspect is ensuring measurability. Reach and impact are 2 key metrics for measuring channel performance, and you should select a mix of channels with high reach and/or impact. The selection of channels must also consider the readiness to implement and prioritizing these channels based on the effectiveness versus feasibility. And over to you now, Frank.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I noticed a couple of questions on kind of channel selection as well, so I'm sure that will come up again in the Q&A and we can go into that in some detail. But this typical HCP omnichannel user journey here might help with that. So what we've done here, this is a kind of distillation of the kinds of user journeys that many of our clients are working with, that we've helped develop for them, both from a technical point of view, from a content point of view, from a messaging point of view, locking into a strategy, hitting all their strategic imperatives. And what we're looking at here is basically on the medical side. We've got 4 channels here, and I'll just take you through it. So on the left hand side, we're looking at a mass mail out. So you might have a mass mail out to, let's take an example. These HCPs here are mostly referrers. They will not be prescribers of your particular product. They might not have patients who you know, are routinely going to be receiving this, but they perhaps need to recognize symptoms. So we can have a mass mail out to HCPs who need to understand something of symptoms, something of disease state perhaps. And this mail will go out to a large list. It might be within our CRM at that point, our customer relationship management database. It may be a list that we've bought in. Ideally, we'd want to put them in CRM first, but we can always do that based on respondents. So we send this mail out. You'll note down in the bottom left-hand corner there, we're using this channel to reach. So this is our engagement channel. Remember what Melissa just talked about, what Malvika talked about earlier. So this is our first channel where we're trying to trigger this engagement with HCPs, and we're using mass mail for that. From this mass mail, we give them a link to our HCP portal, so a web channel. So we've got 2 channels in play now. If they don't respond to that mail immediately, we send a nudge after about 7 days. That might be automated, it might not. Remember, if we're using automation, something like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Adobe Experience Manager behind the scenes, we set up all those algorithms, those processes, those decision trees to make these things happen. From the medical side, even from the commercial and marketing side, you know, individuals within pharma, our clients, they don't need to worry about that. How do you set up an algorithm? They just need to do the thinking. What are the questions we would ask here? And here it's relatively simple. If we've got a HCP who's a target individual who's not responding to the email after 7 days, we'd like to nudge them to try and get them to do it again. And if they don't, we'll take further actions. They're more to the right-hand side. So we get these HCPs. They've clicked through. They're now people we want to talk to further. The MSL can get involved here and can communicate with them directly. We will send a Viva approved email. So that's a one-to-one email as opposed to mass. That's one-to-one. That's personalized. That's integrated with the rest of the CRM. So now we've got 3 channels in play here. The MSL sends this email. If the HCP responds to that, there can be further communications. We've given an example where that could go out to a medical affairs survey. So we find out more about the HCP's patients, their specialization, their understanding of this particular product, so we can put them onto the adoption ladder. Or they might go to a face-to-face. The MSL might suggest a face-to-face meeting where we can go through something on a scientific detail aid, an interactive visual aid, perhaps delivered on the iPad in Viva, where we can tell you something about this product, something about how it works, something about the science and the medicine behind it, or even the patients that respond best to that. So now we've got 4 channels in play there. So we've got the mass mails, we've got Viva approved emails, we've got the iPad face-to-face delivery, we've got the web portal. We could consider the personal conversation at that face-to-face a 5th channel if you wish. And it's worth doing that because we need to make sure with Omnichannel that we do capture information from face-to-face conversations. In the surgery, in corridor conversations at congresses, if you get something from the HCP that's valuable, that's an insight, that a question they're asking of you, that needs to be fed back into the system too. And then after this face-to-face or any other contact, we can do additional emails. We have these same nudges. We send them to the web portal. We monitor what they're doing there. That feeds back into the CRM. They've downloaded this item. They've downloaded this item. They've signed up for this particular webinar. That could be an additional channel as well. Excuse me. We send them back to the HCP portal from this additional mail, perhaps for a deep dive. We've talked about that, using an additional channel to give more information, something that can't be conveyed just by an email, perhaps that can't even be conveyed face-to-face. We need to give some kind of interactive explanation of our data, our trial data, for instance. So we use a web channel for that. If we're getting people and they're dropping out, they're not doing what we'd like them to do, they're not responding to the emails, they're even Viva one-to-one emails, they're not responding to those, we need another methodology for that. We've found that a simple phone call from an MSL or a rep will bring people back into the fold very often, or will explain why they're not interested. It may be we've got their specialism wrong, they're not seeing patients like this, it's simply not relevant to them. But never be afraid to drop out of the digital channels to an analog channel of face-to-face or human contact to try and bring people in or understand a little bit more about them and feed that information back into the CRM. So as I mentioned earlier, these human conversations, they can be one of the areas where, you know, some of our clients still kind of struggle, not with the mechanics of it, but with the conceptuals of it. They're thinking, well, this is the digital process. Surely we don't need to think about our face-to-face conversations. Yes, you do. That's a part of Omnichannel. And it's, again, not that hard to do. Make sure your call reports, your MSL call reports are fed in. Make sure those corridor conversations at congresses are picked up as well. Next slide, please, Mel. Okay, so we've already heard a little bit from Mel and from Malvika about, excuse me, frog in my throat today, about what's different about omnichannel projects. So let's just digest that and what it means, really. So you need an early involvement of everyone on the agency and the client side beyond the normal medical writing crew. So it would be a larger team. You'll typically involve digital and IT partners, particularly from the agency, but more often than not on the client side as well, and get those involved right from the start so that they understand the objectives of this communication campaign. They understand the means of final delivery, or they can give some indication of, you know, some channels you might not have thought about. So early involvement of everyone is extremely holistic. It goes beyond the normal teams. Silo busting is a routine part of omnichannel. For particular, you know, for at this moment in time, omnichannel may be quite new to clients, to client teams. There may be individuals within client teams, say on the regulatory side, who are not familiar with omnichannel. They may not have done these kind of things before. So a lot of people are learning. So in the same way that we've done it here with this webinar to try and make everything reasonable, you know, as explicable as possible, we try and avoid jargon. It's often necessary to get omnichannel specialists on these calls who can speak about it without jargon, make it clear to everyone. So it can be a new concept to the medical writers on the agency side. It can be new for the clients as well. And clearly, if they're moving from multi-channel to omnichannel, there's less for them to learn. There are fewer new concepts, but there might be some wrinkles as well. The teams on the client side, it's an obvious inference. They will be much larger. They will be bringing in people from data privacy. IT is obvious, regulatory potentially. It may go even beyond that. So there'll be larger teams on the client side, more people to inform, more people to get on board and get buy-in from. But there are a lot of similarities with non-omnichannel projects. As Malvika said, from the medical writing side, it's not that new. It's not that different. Segmentation and personas often will not be audiences that medical writers have written to, but if you think about it, it should not be that challenging. And once you've done a few projects, it starts to become a great deal easier. A strategic approach is needed from everyone, particularly aiming down the stream, 18 months, 2 years down the line. It's a long time to get some of these projects and channels live and get the materials out on them. But you need to be planning for the longer term, not just these short-term tactical deliveries. Think about the longer-term strategic approach to make sure the right content is getting out to the right people at the right time. And omnichannel does not stand still. We've already mentioned some of the automation aspects that are provided by Adobe Experience Manager, AEM, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, SFMC. AI will be playing a part. It is already playing a part. It will be playing much more of a part. in looking at the communications that go out there, in looking at the characteristics of HCPs, how they respond to these communications, in looking at the segmentations and personas, comparative monitoring of these different segmentations and seeing how they react to the materials. AI is ideally suited to picking out patterns of activity and suggesting nudges, both to the client business, to the agency working, but also to the HCPs. So saying, if you enjoyed this video from this KE or KOL, you might enjoy this video too. On the client side, it will be saying, okay, so 60% of this segment, they are moving quite smoothly to the next adoption ladder position if we show them this trial data. But this 40% have been quite resistant, so we need to think of a new mechanism for that. I can suggest, the AI can suggest, we give them this data, but in a more immediately appreciable form. Maybe we need to do an infographic, maybe we need some interactive mechanism, maybe there's an animation that can bring in chronology that might make it clearer. So AI will definitely become more and more involved, and we're obviously keen for that, and we're looking at that right now, looking at that, how that can function and how we can integrate that into our client offerings. And I think that probably takes us to time. And I hope, Peter, we've hit your time perfectly. So just a final reminder, please feel free to connect with any of us here. I can see that many people have already been doing that. Scan the QRs and join up with us. But at that point, I'll hand back to you, Peter, and we can go into the Q&A.
Brilliant, thanks, Frank. So if we can lose those slides, that would be great. But thank you very much. That was very comprehensive, very a lot of good stuff in there. We've got some questions coming in. We'll try and address some of those. To members of the audience, please do keep them coming in the text boxes. Any comments or questions, observations, and we'll sort of involve them in the discussion. We've got a few minutes, so let's see what we can cover off. Just out of interest, I was listening out for it, so I'm going to put you on the spot slightly, Frank. I think Anonymous basically asked a key question. I guess a key question: what is the advantage of applying omni-channel strategy? What's your answer to that? I mean,
so two very simple answers. There is a theoretical answer and there's a real world answer. The real world answer, to start with, more prescriptions, more engagement. We see that in reality. It works. Omnichannel works. I think it's fairly intuitive that if it did not work, there wouldn't be a push among almost all of our clients to take it from their commercial side to their medical side, but there is. They know that it works on the marketing side. They can see that from a bottom line on the spreadsheet, it has benefits there. So it's moving to medical. From a theoretical side, and the two are obviously meshed, we all know that if someone approaches us as an individual, seeks to understand more about us, if they're trying to convince us of something or sell us something, we're more receptive to it. So an omni-channel strategy is one where the client company, the pharmaceutical company, knows quite a lot about this doctor. They know a lot about the HCP. They can tailor these communications. They get a reaction. They get an engagement. They know exactly what they need to do in order to convince this doctor of this particular element, or educate them in this particular way. They know a knowledge gap, for instance, and they can provide the information they need in order to fill that knowledge gap. So that's really where the effectiveness comes from. It's about understanding essentially your customer. And even on the medical side, that HCPs, they are still customers of the pharmaceutical industry. We can't forget that. And when you understand them better and understand their needs and understand their patients' needs better, you can meet those needs more effectively.
Again, just out of interest, we're focused, as I'm understanding what you're talking about, on the medical affairs side of it and communicating information to HCPs, and you're drawing distinction with the commercial side. You said a number of times about what's happening on the commercial side versus medical. I mean, the point you just made is really important, isn't it? That same HCP might be, engaging with all sides of the business. So this is where omnichannel, in theory, comes into it, because the left hand, the right hand really does know what they're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's just
the business has a corporate memory and a corporate understanding of that HCP. So for one thing, you're not badgering these people. You're not sending
exactly,
50 communications a week and driving them into digital overload. You can manage the communications with them, and there's obviously a separation. We have this division between commercial and medical, so we can maintain that as well. But it's really about this understanding and moving them along. It's much harder for medical as well to show the effectiveness of for med affairs to show the effectiveness of what they do. How do we show we're a success? Return on investment is a challenge in medical, and I'm sure you've talked about this previously. It can be hard to demonstrate their success. Omnichannel gives a way of doing that, because if you know all about that HCP at the start of your omnichannel engagement and you monitor their progression along these educational or scientific or other adoption ladders, you can demonstrate your ROI. So from an internal business perspective, omnichannel makes an awful lot of sense for medical. It gives them a tool that they haven't had before.
And you touched again. You sort of touched on this, but several of the questions came in, and quite early on, who was it? Jennifer came in. I think you did touch on this a little bit, but maybe just explore it for a moment. You made quite a point of omnichannel is about having an HCP at the center. Although my understanding of what you said there was it's not necessarily an HCP, it's the person you're trying to communicate with, which may not always be the same thing. It's just we tend to talk in terms of HCPs, healthcare professionals. Okay. And Jennifer said, and a couple of other people have said the same thing, and you touched on it. Are people really thinking like that, or are they tending to use omnichannel just for everything? Okay, we send out an email, we have a website, we have a face-to-face meeting. That's omnichannel. How hard is the battle to get them to understand that omnichannel is actually about the database and that customer at the center of it, sort of?
Okay. Full disclosure, for some of our clients, it's harder than for others. For
in real life, yeah.
For some of our client companies, they do tend to put an omnichannel badge on almost anything that involves digital engagement. And they will often do that in response to strategic directives that are coming from higher up that says you got to do omnichannel, you got to do omnichannel. The reason why we stress the importance of the CRM for this, that customer relationship management database, is because it can't be omnichannel if you don't have a digital record of your HCPs. But the second reason is it's not that hard. It's really not that hard. If you're already doing multi-channel communications, you're already developing emails, you have a website, you have virtual webinars, you have these other channels where you're communicating with HCPs, it is not that hard to start joining them up. Malvika stressed that you can legitimately start calling this omnichannel if you have three channels. That's absolutely true. To be honest, you can legitimately call it omnichannel if you just got two, as long as you got the CRM at the center, as long as you're recording these interactions, it's omnichannel. Some client companies will hold their heads in their hands and they say, well, how can we build this omnichannel communication strategy when we need to communicate with our customers in China and they're on WeChat and we don't have a WeChat specialist? But we have everything else. We have 90% of reach with 90% of our other HCPs, but we don't have that. We can't do omnichannel until we have that. No, do what you can do. Fix what you can fix. Go out there, build this step-by-step approach, and start building outwards in shells from this CRM. Add on a channel, add on a communication objective that you can legitimately achieve through one of these channels.
Okay, and that's because there's an obvious point is it's just a never-ending process, isn't it? You just keep adding channels in because you'll always find someone who wants something given to them in a different way, sort of thing.
Yeah, but that's we know that things change as well. We had a really good experience. I say it's a good experience. One of our clients working in Ukraine, at the moment of the Russian invasion, they were using WhatsApp as one of their key channels. WhatsApp, they decided the Russians had broken, and in terms of encryption. And as a result of this, in the space of just 2 or 3 weeks, almost everyone in Ukraine who had been working with WhatsApp swapped to other digital channels with better encryption. Telegram being one of those that they were using. So our clients, in the space of about 3 weeks, a fantastic local team were able to make that move from using WhatsApp to Telegram in response to external circumstances that they really couldn't have expected, but did that so quickly and so efficiently that they maintained it. So the omnichannel strategy changed. They were using a new channel, but it adapted to real world circumstances. In the same way, when you're using Salesforce Marketing Cloud and things like this, if you start to see a dip in opens from emails or opens from one particular channel, you think, well, we need to, you know, manipulate this and shift to something else. So it's a growth strategy.
It's interesting. There's a number of questions coming in terms of engaging with busy HCPs, what sort of content you're whether, you know, the regulatory aspects and so on. I mean, it can become a very complicated environment, can't it? I guess that's just, and maybe we need to be a bit careful because we can go down some rabbit holes here. You know, you've got to worry about the regulatory aspects of dealing with people in different parts of the world through one system, sort of thing. So your system has to take that into account, doesn't it? Which I think it probably sort of does, but I just think that's quite complicated once you start going down this line. Well, I wanted to bring Malvika in to talk more about the content side just for a couple of minutes. And I think a question came in early on in terms of you know, what strategic training and support do you wish you'd had when writing the content and the materials. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's interesting because some of what you're talking about, I think, is just, and maybe you said that it's just a mindset because what you're doing is what you've always done, sort of thing. But answering that question in terms of what sort of training support you either had or wish you'd had, does that make sense?
Yeah. To me, I think quite a bit of it was learning on the job, just going through a few projects, figuring out the content side of it, key messages and all that stuff is pick upable. I think the part that would have been good to have more training on was more on the technical stuff. So CRM, what is it? How do we link all these different things together? The different channels that are out there and the pros and cons of each one. It's also partly depending on the client and the project, different channels become relevant and then you just learn about them in that process. Yeah, but I think the CRM piece is something that's quite new.
Because we've always talked about writing for the audience, and you know, if you've written something for an HCP, and then it's, you know, part of your job is to take that content and write it for a patient, or take a piece of content that's been written for a publication, take it for HCP, but take that content and put it into a website, and so a lot of this is what you've been doing. It's just pulling it together into a system, which is the interesting aspect, I guess. I've got two quick questions I'm going to try and finish on very quickly, though. I'm not sure who wants to try these. The easy one, I think, but can it be brief, is we talked a bit about measuring, and the whole point of this is to monitor and measure impact. I think, Frank, you were saying measuring impact. I get entirely how you can measure the engagement because X people have engaged with something. Just can you touch on how you, in real life, how you measure impact?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that's a really good point. You can measure reach really easily. Has a HCP opened this email, but has the email hit home? Have they taken on board what you've said?
And
yeah, that's
something.
More of a challenge. Now, you can use surveying for that. We've already got our adoption ladder. We talked about that a great deal. So you can look at the HCP from a perspective of their medical knowledge, perhaps via survey, and establish where they are. You can have follow-up conversations with MSLs. Did you get this email? What did you think of this data and how it related? You can pop that back into it as well. One thing that we've been working with recently is, I don't know whether we should talk about this, but looking at specific phrases that might be relevant in your science, your understanding of the science and medicine, that might not be relevant in your competing company's science and medicine. Particular phrases, and look for those phrases and use of those phrases in social media and professional media, in publications, in titles. So you can start to establish, you know, do we own this language? Or do we, as company X, when we're talking about the language in this way, have we had an impact with our HCPs? Have we introduced new phrases and language into their language in the way that they communicate on their social media, on their Twitter, on their LinkedIn, even Facebook, in the titles of publications that they are creating? That's obviously a longer term, but a relatively easy way to monitor if you're really having impact.
And I guess is where AI might start to come in,
Yeah.
because you're starting to talk about monitoring a database of content, a very big database of content, for quite subtle, or maybe possibly quite subtle changes and so on. My question, which I just want to throw at you, but I don't think we've got time to talk very much about it. Again, we've talked about AI, which everyone's talking about at the moment, but you've talked about it, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, more in terms of monitoring and measuring and seeing what's going on. I just wonder whether you've got a very quick view on whether AI can become important on the content creation side. So you've got a chunk of content, and then part of Omnichannel is about delivering it in different ways, bite size or different languages and different, and in principle, AI could just come in and go, right, okay, we'll take that content and we'll deliver it in X different ways. I just wonder whether you've got a view on that.
I'll give one really quick instance, and then I'll pass it to Malvika, who I think has got, I'm sure has got a view on this. There is a role for AI and public AI now in things like personas. I mentioned earlier, some of our clients find it quite hard to establish archetypes of a typical customer, a typical HCP in this role, in this role, in this role, patients and public. There is a role for AI now where you can use, say, something like ChatGPT, although we would not recommend doing this with public AI tools, single domain tools that you maintain control of. That's a little bit better. But you can create a persona, say to ChatGPT, tell me what this particular person, and I'll describe them to you. They are married, they have 3 children, they live in Indonesia, they are very concerned about their health, but they have limited budget. They're more concerned for their children than others. Tell me how they would react to this kind of messaging, or tell me how a reader of a particular newspaper who has only consumed the information from this newspaper, which the AI models obviously can tell you, how they would react to this particular message or this particular campaign kind of direction. So those are things that AI can do right now that could be of use to some of our customers to generate content without actually generating the content itself. And now I'll hand to Malvika.
Go on,
Thanks,
quick point from Malvika. Go on, just to wrap it up.
Final point, I think that AI will definitely have a larger piece to play, probably not quite as yet. I think that as writers, we would more and more have a role in reviewing data accuracy, and also where we have clients who just want something bespoke and has that human touch, it doesn't look maybe templated as something that AI might come up with. That's where we would have a greater role. Although that's at these days, sometimes you can't tell the difference.
Okay, look, guys, we're over time, and I'm just enjoying myself. I could carry on talking, so I'm sorry, I'm going to draw a halt. It's important that we stick to the timing. So thank you very much. I'm going to make a very clear message or put out a very clear message to everyone listening to us. Please do make contact with you guys. I know you're all very happy to hear. You've already said that via LinkedIn is an easy way. So please, people, reach out to each other and follow up these questions. There's some really interesting aspects in there. Maybe we can get you back and talk about some of this in a bit more detail in the future. For now, thank you. If anybody's interested in what I'm doing, MedComms.networking.com will reach out. But everybody, for today, look after yourselves. Give us a little wave and I'll stop the recording. Take care. Bye.